Hey everybody, welcome back to Tim Travels. It's Terry, your host. So I had some people ask me if I could do a kind of comparison between Prime and Night, since I've been kind of at both companies. So I'm going to do that. Sorry about the glare. I'm going to do that. But somebody asked also about GP Transco. So I'll throw that in at the end, because really Prime and Night are kind of similar in that they both accept people without CDLs. They have training programs, and they have a lot of similarities. They're both kind of mega carriers, and GP Transco really isn't like that, but I can still maybe fill in some of the blanks. So I identified a few key areas, and like I said, if you stay to the end, I'll talk about GP Transco and try to address some of these too. But a few key areas that I wanted to talk about to kind of do a comparison and see if this helps. So the first one, I got the VAT board out today, hiring process. Second one, training. Third is pay. Fourth is amenities, and then fifth is culture. Now, my information about Night, other than what's publicly available, and obviously you could look up stuff on their website, I'm going to tell you what my experience was like, and at both companies, and kind of compare and contrast. So and also keep in mind that I left Night in December of 2019. So my information might be a little bit dated, although I will say this: I have been contacted a number of different times by Night since I left about jobs, and I even talked to my my former terminal manager about coming back. So I mean, I kind of know how things are still going. So first of all, let's talk about the hiring process. The hiring process at Prime is a little more rigorous, in my opinion, than the hiring process at Night. Night does get people, it seems like Night can get people in the door quicker, but maybe that's just my impression because of how things have been since I came to Prime, meaning the work, the flow of people in, truck availability, etc. But just to give you an idea, I applied to Night just like I applied to Prime online, kind of 10 Street is like this app, and I think lots of companies do it. Both applications were pretty much the same. I will say that Prime asked for some extra information, and then I kind of actually pushed back on it a little bit, and then they were just like, okay, because like I got this kind of like form email response, and they're like, oh, we need to see tax returns for this period of time where you were self-employed. But I was, I'm like, no, I'm not giving you tax returns. I said I can prove what I was doing, just like I proved tonight. I got customers that will tell you, yeah, Terry used to hire, haul stuff with his Sprinter. So, I pushed back on that, and then they were like, oh, it's okay. So, drug testing. Obviously, both companies do drug testing. When I first went to Night, they did not have the drug clearinghouse. So I don't think that I had to do the drug clearinghouse thing. When I went to Night, Night paid for my physical. The downside to that is that it's their physical. In other words, when I did leave Night, I couldn't use my physical from there. I had to go pay for another one to get on with a different company. But that's just something that they want to keep proprietary. The process to get into Prime, I already had it. I already had a physical. I already had a medical card, so I just had to send copies in to do that. And sorry, I did mention drug testing. So both companies obviously do drug testing. However, Knight also does a hair follicle test, as far as I know. So I had to go to the terminal and they cut some hair off of my body, not my head. They actually, I think they always want to take like body hair. So, I mean, I don't know what they do with women that don't have much body hair, but, I guess they take a little piece of their nose hair. But anyway, you know, they cut some hair off my armpit, and they test that. Now, let me say this, because it just so happens I was talking to a guy, really nice guy that I met in TNT, or pretty much done with TNT, named Lewis. I talked to him in Springfield yesterday at the terminal. You know, the hair follicle test, if you're worried about that, I mean, there are two things to do. One is just wait longer, because, you know, it's a look back farther than a urinalysis. One is to just wait longer, or the other is to just take the chance that you will get excluded from being hired at Knight. But here's the thing. The hair follicle test is not reliable enough that the FMCSA allows the results of a hair follicle drug test to be put into the clearinghouse. So you could pass a urinalysis with Knight, fail the hair follicle test, and not have a negative mark in the clearinghouse, and then turn around and go to some other company like Prime that only does the urinalysis. I don't know. I mean, I don't worry about that stuff anyway, but I don't know why a company wants to use something that's not super reliable, except that they're just looking to figure out a way to exclude some people. So that's that. Okay, so that's kind of the hiring process for both companies. Okay, so training. As you know about Prime, you come to orientation, and within a couple 3 days, if everything's good to go, you start PSD. Now let me say this about Prime. You want to bring a hard copy of the application you submitted, because they're going to have you fill out a hard copy. And if you don't have what you said, or you don't have what you already submitted, it's very possible that you will create, through, no nefarious reasons, but you will create inconsistencies between the two applications. So bring the hard copy so that you can put exactly on the hard copy they give you, because they'll give it to you to take back to your room and fill out. So you put exactly the exact same things, same dates, all that stuff. So there's no inconsistencies that they then are like, well, we have to resolve these inconsistencies before you can continue in training. So, then you do your PSD. Of course, in training, in the PSD phase at Prime, you are not a company employee. You don't get a salary. You get basically a loan or a repayable stipend that's put on a card that you can use to buy whatever you need. Okay, and I guess you can get cash. Somebody might be able to enlighten me on that. But it's just $200 a week, so you don't starve to death. But Prime does house you, and takes care of other stuff that Knight doesn't. In contrast, when I was in training, I went to Phoenix. Now, I understand they do their CDL training in a few different locations now, but I went to the CDL training at the Phoenix terminal. It was 3 weeks long, and it was very formalized. It was just like a truck driving school would be. So you weren't going out on loads like you do at Prime. You were classroom, pad, and going out with a licensed instructor, licensed CDL, because they didn't have like the instructor thing. Although the guy I went out most with had like 3 million miles at night, and he had started at another company. So I mean, he was, you know, super experienced. And I still hear his voice a lot when I'm like making a turn, you know, the techniques he taught us, and I try to teach those same techniques to people because they worked. He was, like I said, a super experienced driver, and we would go out as groups. So in the back of the truck, we had trucks with sleepers, but they took out the bunk and they would put like a bench seat in there with 3 seat belts back there. So the instructor would be in the passenger seat, one student would be driving, and everybody else would be watching. So you could learn from other people's mistakes. You were constantly being instructed. Same thing in the classroom, same thing on the pad. Now on the pad, they gave you some independence. There was always a couple of instructors outside, because they had typically 3 classes going on simultaneously. So each class was in week 1, week 2, week 3. The idea is that by the time you get to the end of week 3, and for me it was a Thursday, you take the CDL test right there on the pad that you've been working on the whole time, and you know, it was pretty seamless. That program has a very, very high success rate. Prime has a lot of people that pass the first time too, but in the 3 weeks I was at Phoenix getting my CDL, not one student didn't pass the test on the first try. Some people came close, you know, racked up a lot of points, but everybody passed and left. Okay, and then so that was the process of getting through that portion. So there's the difference: CDL school, PSD. So once we got our CDLs, and once you get your CDL at Prime you go on a training truck. That's the TNT phase. You got to do 30,000 miles, and you basically team train. In other words, the good instructor is going to work a lot of hours because they're going to drive their shift. But if you can ask anybody that's trained with me, I spend a fair amount of time in the right-hand seat, and I spend other time when I should be sleeping, dealing with dispatch or, you know, some other issue, sales maybe every once in a while. So that's kind of, you know, everybody kind of knows about TNT if you've been around this channel at all. So at night it's slightly different. Your instructor, because night does lease, but it's not like it is at Prime. It's not ubiquitous. It's not widespread. I mean, I would meet people that lease periodically, but it's just not the same. So consequently, a lot of the people at night that are training are company drivers. The way the training works there is, and I think I've mentioned this before, but basically you have to be on your trainer's truck, at least when I went through it, for 28 days. So basically 4 weeks. I mean, actually that's exactly 4 weeks. It's not a month, it's exactly 4 weeks, right? But the difference is this: if my trainer and I went somewhere and we had to wait 6 hours for a load, you know, that day, whatever we did that day, it didn't matter if we only made 200 miles that day. It was a day, right? Because they're teaching, you know, they're not so concerned about the miles. They're teaching you to be a truck driver. Like dealing with shippers, receivers, going through weigh stations, maybe having a breakdown, whatever it is, right? Including just being at the terminals, right? It's all part of the truck driver experience. It's not just based on miles. The other thing that really doesn't happen is my trainer 90% of the time, he was in the right-hand seat if I was driving. 90% of the time, or actually all the time, if he was driving, I was in the right-hand seat. We didn't run as a true team. We ran as two guys basically handling maybe like super single loads. But these were not like run 3,000 miles in, 5 days type of thing, or 4 days. It wasn't 24/7, the truck's moving. Nothing like that. How I was compensated in my training phase for 28 days was I got $500 a week salary. That was paid by the company. My trainer got, I believe, $200 a week for each week I was on the truck. Now keep in mind, there were days I was on the truck where we didn't have a load and we were like in Charlotte. That wasn't my home terminal, but it was his. He would go home. So I'd just hang out in the truck, read a book, go in the terminal, watch TV, maybe borrow a vehicle and go do something. But he might be at home. And then he'd be back, we'd get a load or pre-plan, he'd come back in the morning or whatever. So it's kind of like some days were kind of wasted, but I had a good trainer. And so I got a lot of valuable experience. So that was kind of the train. And then at 28 days, you kind of do a road test with somebody from the training department at the terminal where you just happen to be. So I did that in Charlotte, caught a ride back with another night driver going up to Carlisle. So that's kind of training. Pay. For company drivers, and again, this is 3 years ago. I'm sure mileage rates have gone up at night, and it's probably actually online. But here's what happened. So once I got off my trainer's truck, I was kind of on like probation for like 30,000 solo miles, and those 30,000 miles I only got paid 36 cents a mile. Now I was still eligible for productivity bonuses, and for instance, if you hit 11,000 miles in a month, you would get 4 cents per mile run extra. So you'd get like a $440 check like around the 15th of the following month. So excuse me. So that's a little bit of a boost. Then after 30,000 miles, I went to 40 cents a mile as my base. Now here's the thing to understand about night, and I'm sure they're still doing it this way. Night is they consider themselves an irregular route, over the road, medium distance carrier. At night, it's not super common to have coast-to-coast runs in the dry division. And I'll come back to difference between dry, reefer, etc. So I ran dry, but it wasn't I sometimes would get runs from like New Jersey to Los Angeles, okay? But sometimes I would get trips that were like 160 miles. So how, sorry, I just want to cough. So how night pays is my base pay was the least amount of cents per mile that I would make on a trip. So for instance, on one of those trips from Jersey to LA, that trip was over 750 miles, so I'd get my base rate, 40 cents a mile. But if a trip was between like 501 miles and 750, I would get like 41 cents. And so the shorter the trip, the more cents per mile you got. And then if it was really short, there was also like, I think, an automatic $100 kicker. So like one time I had a trip, I went from the terminal, I picked up a trailer in the terminal, went down the road to Chewy and had a live unload. Okay, the trip was like 5 miles, but they paid me $100 plus, I don't know, 10 more miles, so $104 or whatever it was. So that's kind of how that worked, because they wanted people to be willing to accept short runs, so they would pay them more. And by the way, when I was at night, you could reject a load. I never did, mainly because I always felt like if I took the load they offered me, then they would take care of me, and that was generally true. Oftentimes I come off home time, they'd be like, "Hey, I need you to go over to Southern New Jersey." Well, from Carlisle over to pick up in Lancaster, PA, and go like 120 miles, right? A lot of drivers would be like, "No, I'm not doing that." But oftentimes when I did that, then they'd be like, "Oh, go down to ExxonMobil and pick up a trailer full of 55-gallon drums of lube oil and take them to Vernon, California, or take them to Salt Lake City." So I always felt like I was making my DM's job easier, and by doing that, I was helping myself. So that's the reason I didn't refuse loads there. So let's talk pay at Prime. So I think solo, company drivers, you get like 50 cents, and if you drive the smaller truck, you get a little bit more. I candidly don't know how the miles go there. And again, when I was making 40 cents a mile, I would often qualify for an extra 4 cents a mile just because of production. I ran a lot harder. I ran hard. I know that Prime has some incentives for like fuel, etc. So I don't have a good apples to apples comparison for that. You'd kind of have to do your own research. So let's talk about amenities. Knight has a gazillion terminals. In fact, I bet you could make a living at Knight running terminal to terminal if you wanted to. Like you could go from one terminal, skip two, and hit the fourth one or the third one, You name a major city in the United States, I guarantee Knight has some version of a terminal. Now, some Knight terminals are really not terminals, and the reason I say that is because they don't dispatch from them. So for example, Knight has a terminal in El Paso and a terminal in Fontana, California. But they're dispatched, anybody that's working out of those two is dispatched out of Phoenix. And I'm not sure that the Tulare, California terminal isn't also dispatched out of Phoenix. But they have some terminals in pretty cool places like Vegas. I mean, seriously, the Vegas Knight terminal is right. I mean, you can walk to a lot of nice stuff, casinos, all this stuff. It's not right in Vegas, it's in North Las Vegas, but I like that terminal a lot because there were hotels right next to it if you wanted to just get off the truck. I used to walk down to In-N-Out, wasn't bad. So there are a lot of terminals, but they're not as extensive as Prime terminals. One of the things I don't like or didn't like about Knight terminals is, quite frankly, and I've said this before, Knight shops, with some exceptions, are a pain in the ass. I know Phoenix is a pain in the ass because I've talked to lots of people who had their truck in there. My shop in Carlisle, horrible. Charlotte, North Carolina was a horrible shop. Indianapolis, Columbus, not so bad. But it just seemed like the shops, there weren't a lot of happy people. And I think, candidly, it might be because of compensation. Maybe it's gotten better. Prime has way better shops, in my opinion, than Knight. They have less, but they're much better. Also, the inbound process at Prime can be frustrating, but I think on balance it's very good. I remember having a flat tire on a trailer, and I am not kidding you. I was on the yard, I was at my own home terminal, flat tire on a trailer, it's 10 after 5. Guess what I gotta do? I gotta call roadside. Why? Because the shop, man, you'd have thought they had a union. Because at 4:59, if you walked in there, they're like, come back on Monday. They weren't open on nights. They weren't open on weekends. It was it was like going to Midas to get something fixed. It was just a pain in the ass. The equipment at Prime is, in my opinion, significantly better. Night trailers, when I was there, none of them had air ride, at least in the dry division. None of them are air ride trailers. So the sliding, the tandems, that was all manual. And sometimes if that lever was bent or whatever, you couldn't get your tandems to slide right. They do use Bud wheels there. I don't know if that's, it doesn't mean much to me. Super singles here at Prime, everybody kind of knows that. The terminals at night, some are very nice and well appointed, but there's no food service. There are free laundry facilities at every terminal. There's free ice, free water, but basically you're looking at vending machines or maybe one of those like honor kiosk type of things like they have at the Salt Lake terminal. The difference is, I think that all the night terminals, they would just take a credit card swipe. So if you got into town and it was really late, you know, and you didn't want to call Pizza Hut or whatever, somebody that would deliver, there was always a way to get some food. And you know, they had salads, sandwiches and stuff, so it wasn't horrible. But it certainly wasn't what you've come to expect at a Prime terminal if you've been to one. But it was nice having an enormous network, because even terminals that were nothing more than drop yards, like say the Chicago terminal, or I mean, I used to go to Gulfport, but I think that's a little bit more of a terminal because they have a shop. And Nashville is a little bit more of a terminal because they have a shop and maybe some office people. But like Chicago was right off of 80. It's essentially a glorified drop yard, but there's a shower, there's a bathroom, there's a TV, ice machine, right? Those are the things I would always look for. So, you know, as Prime kind of adds a little bit more, like we're gonna open this Manuka terminal, I think we start getting to the point where you will say that, you know, it's never going to be as extensive as Night. And I think Night and Swift now share terminals somewhat, because I see some trailers from each company at other people's terminals. But Prime has like the gold standard in terminals, I think, in the industry. Amenities, you know, at like my first couple of trucks didn't have inverters, but they were older. Then I got a truck, I got a 2020 International, and I've said I don't like Internationals, but it had an inverter and it was already equipped with a fridge. That's at Night. So that's a little bit different than what we have here at Prime. I don't worry too much about that stuff. The one thing I will say is, if you want to talk about trucks, Night uses an incredibly annoying like truck control system, and excuse me, and their like collision alarm, at least on the Internationals I had, would slam on the brakes. I mean hard, like dangerously hard, because it would do it even when it was like snowing out. If it sensed like a bridge or an overhead sign was actually like something you were going to collide with, it would slam on the brakes. It didn't matter if it was freezing rain out. So I didn't like that system. And in fact, you know, that is probably one thing that would always prevent me from going back to Night. And they have this safety point system. So like if you come up too close behind somebody and you know, you get an alarm, but then you're like, you don't back off within 2 seconds, like get on the brakes within 2 seconds, but instead just swing out to pass. When you swing out to pass, you're too close behind the truck that's zipping by for a few seconds, you get like a huge hit on your safety points. I was never able to get, you know, even reasonably good safety score, because if I wanted a reasonably good safety score, I would have been on the brakes all the time. Like the second somebody cuts in front of you, you can't just slow down and coast. You actually have to brake. I never liked that system. That's one reason I would not go back to tonight. Okay, let's talk about culture. I had a great DM and a great TM, terminal manager. I think highly of both of them still. They never did me wrong, and they did a lot of things to hook me up sometimes. But I know a lot of people who had crappy DMs at night. A lot of people. At Prime, I like my fleet manager. I like the culture. At night, there were a lot of people in the upper echelon. They'd give you their business cards. They'd be like, "Hey, if something's wrong, tell us." So and I have zero doubt that was genuine, because when I did take stuff up, like I went to the East Coast maintenance head one time for how I was treated at a terminal, in the garage. They do respond, but it's a big company. The other thing about the culture at night is this: night rewards miles. If you want to make really good money at night and you're not training, because some trainers make pretty good money. I knew trainers there that were making six figures. They trained a lot, but they were making six figures. And keep in mind, anybody that came on their truck already had a CDL. But the way you get more pay at night is by racking up more miles. So you get pay increases at, like I said, after 30,000 miles, and then at 100,000, 250, 500, 750, a million. There's quite a few people at night that have been there for 1 million miles. I mean, there are also quite a few that have been at Prime. I mean, they're both big companies. The one thing I will say about night is part of a publicly traded company. And by the way, just to dispel any rumors, Knight did not buy Swift. I hear that often, but it's not true. Knight, Swift, bar none, and Abilene, the green trucks, all four of those trucking companies are under a company called Knight Swift Holdings, which is the ticker symbol KNX. They're a publicly traded company. All four of those trucking companies are under that, okay? And then within Knight, there are basically, they're starting to do more flatbed, but when I was there, there were some dedicated flatbed people, but it wasn't a huge part of the company at all. But there were three divisions: dry, refrigerated, and ports. And by the way, Knight also owns Cold Trans, so it's cold with a K. And what happened there was a company that I guess went to one of the Knight, because Knight was formed by a couple of cousins. They went to one of them, they knew them, and they're like, hey, we're struggling. And so Knight kind of entered in an agreement with Cold Trans. So sometimes you'll see Knight refrigerated tractors pulling Cold Trans trailers, or vice versa. But there's something you should know if you go to Knight. At least when I was there, if you're at Knight and you want to change divisions, you actually have to quit the division you're in and apply for rehire at the other division. So you guys know Freight Skater, he was flatbed at Prime, and then he was like, hey, I think I want to do reefer. And so so Prime's like, okay, take that headache rack off your truck. Is that what you call that? Anyway, take the headache rack off your truck, and then back under a reefer, and off you go. If you wanted to change divisions from dry to reefer at Knight, you had to quit dry and apply to reefer. Would they take you? Probably. If you had a good record, I'm sure they would still take you. Okay, so that's culture some of the culture there. You know, I always met a lot of like pissed off people at night. They complained about a lot of stuff, but the truth of the matter is those were guys that didn't seem to want to run that much. The culture at Prime, I mean, there's a lot of people that talk about it. I think it's a pretty good culture. I will say this. I have noticed of late that there are some support people at Prime who really don't respect my time, you know, and I'm talking about like people at leasing, some people in operations, not my fleet manager, but other people who, you know, somebody's like, oh, we'll give them a call. I call them, leave a voicemail, never hear back from them. That's unprofessional. You know, I've heard these person from Success talking about, oh, well, you know, we'll get back to you, send us a message, we'll get back to you in 24 to 48 hours, you know. And I'm like, okay, but no, they don't, at least in my case. And, you know, they get back when they get back, and then you follow up with another message, and they just ignore it, I think, because they don't want to deal with it. So that, you know, those are some issues I'm having at Prime right now, but I think overall the culture is good. And again, I was happy at night because I had a good fleet manager and terminal manager. The only thing I wasn't happy about is the pay. But if I'd have been in a position where I was, say, in my 20s and was single, I think I probably would have stuck around there. I would have just dealt with the stuff that I didn't like, and I would have stuck around. So it's, you know, it just depends where you are sometimes. But, you know, you can buy stock at night in KNX at a discounted price. In addition to the 401k and stuff, once a driver gets to like 750,000 miles, they start doing profit sharing. They have a program where when you hit 1 million miles, you get to order a truck. You know, at the time I was like, oh, that sounds kind of cool. But I mean, you can order a truck at Prime. You know, you can get a new truck every 3 years. You know, you don't have to hit 1 million miles to do it. So that, you know, those are some of the cultural differences. But I do feel like even though KNX is a public company, Dave Jackson, who is the CEO there, super bright guy, nice guy. I've met him. And I've met the CEO of the company when I was there. They, you know, they treat you pretty well in the recruiting process and while you're in school. It's just hit or miss on who you get as a driver manager. And for what it's worth, I don't think they have the same compensation for driver managers like they do with fleet managers. I don't know exactly how it works, but you know, there were a couple of good DMs I would always deal with at my terminal, including my own, and then there were some guys that I was like, that guy's a jackass. So, you know, it just runs the gamut. I guess that's about it. Oh, and I didn't get a Christmas bonus at night like I did it from Prime, so. But anyway, I hope that's helpful on those two companies. Real quick, because we're already almost 40 minutes. Real quick about GP Transco. So I went to GP Transco like everybody does as an experienced driver. GP Transco is not a company for somebody that doesn't like to really run hard, and doesn't like speak up for themselves, and isn't a self-starter. That's kind of their vibe going in. They're like, hey, we don't pay to get you to Joliet to our terminal, and the terminal's brand new, it's very nice. Just get yourself here and we'll reimburse you. They did have a hotel for us, but they're like, you know, buy your own food, pay your own way here because you're an experienced driver, and we'll save the receipts and we'll reimburse you. And they did. My wife went out there, my wife and daughter went out there. GP's equipment a lot of it is very new. They have a lot of Freightliners, few KWs. a few older Peterbilts with manuals, and I think they had a Volvo or two hanging around. The truck I got was a 2021 Freightliner. It had like 16,000 miles on it when I got it. They provided fridges and inverters. The other thing that I like over both Night and Prime, if I was company at both companies, is that at GP Transco there's no pet deposit. I paid a $500 pet deposit to Night and another one to J&R Schugel, and I never got a dime of that back, and my dog doesn't tear up a truck. At Prime, my understanding is if you're a company driver and you want a dog, it's like $500 up front, and then they take another $500 out of your pay, so $1,000. That's they might as well just say, we don't want you having a pet on your truck if you're a company driver, which by the way I think is a terrible policy. I think any driver who is allowed to have a pet on a truck is going to be a happier driver. I think people that have pets are willing to stay out longer because they have their friend with them. You know, I know that having B on my truck when I haven't been training or whatever, it's just makes me happier. I mean, I don't give a crap what's happening that day. It makes me happier having her around. And I think that's going to be the reaction of anybody. So I think Prime's very misguided there, you know, and again, it was $500 at Night, so it's like, I mean, it's twice as good, but it's still still a lot of money. Although at Night, you didn't have to put any of it up. They would just, I think they took, you know, like 100, or actually I think they took $50 a week. So it wasn't terrible, but when I left, it's not like B trashed the truck or anything, and I never saw any of that back. So anyway, that's that. But at GP Transco, no pet deposit. GP shop is really good. And by the way, GP's much smaller. I mean, we're talking less than 500 trucks compared to, you know, 8,000 at Prime, and Night has about 5,000, although that may be higher now. Night's much smaller than Swift, but still big. But their shop at GP Transco, the Joliet shop, and that's their only terminal and shop, that shop was open every night during the week till midnight. They had 2 shifts, and then on Saturdays it was open till noon. They would set up appointments. Like if I told my DM, hey, my truck's coming up on a milestone for an oil change, they would he would just set me up an appointment, and then I would just pull in. And a lot of times, you know, like let's say I had a 11 o'clock appointment, I'd get there at 9:30. I'd go in, check in with the shop manager, and you know, half an hour later he's like, hey man, pull your truck in. So they were very good. A lot of their trucks are under warranty, so if there was any problem, they sent you, you know, I think it was like 3 or 4 miles away to the Freightliner dealership. If you got held up at the Freightliner dealership, they put you up at a hotel or whatever. GP was generous with me, both in terms of, you know, my mileage rate, I think my base mileage rate was 54 cents a mile. They have a fuel bonus, but it's competitive. So it's, so what I mean by that is you have to be in the top, and I can't remember what it was, top 60% of your cohort. In other words, I had a 2021, I had a Freightliner with an EPU. I did not compete against somebody that had a Volvo or a KW, or somebody that had an APU. So I just competed against the people with Cascadias with EPUs. I didn't get my fuel bonus a lot there. I did get it sometimes. Their trucks are governed at 67, but you also have a feature called Pass Smart, which allows you to go up to 70 miles an hour on the pedal for up to 15 minutes elapsed time. and usually you get that 15 minutes twice a day. Depending on your schedule, you might see it 3 times. I never really used it for passing. As soon as I was eligible to use Pass Smart, if I was out on, like out kind of in the middle of nowhere, I had that thing on the floor for 15 minutes because I got paid by the mile. Okay, I ran a lot of miles there. I did a show, a video a while back when I started at Prime, and I basically had extrapolated my wages at GP. I think I would have made about 83 to 85 last year. They pay well, but they are, you're gonna have to run. They schedule you very tight. There's very little sitting around. That can sometimes burn through your clock. I had my first DM there. He was kind of lazy, and he wanted to run me and then just give me a load on Friday, tell me to go to the receiver, park there and do a 34 and then deliver on Monday. That happened the first week. He was gone the first week. I called operations. I'm like, this is not going to work for me. And the operations manager was like, hey, we don't want to lose you. I'll get you a new DM and I'll pay you $500 extra because I don't think you got enough miles this week. And I got a new DM and I trained him, and I was like, hey man, I run on recap. Don't tell, if I need a 34, I'll let you know. But even if I got 4 hours in a day, I'll run those 4 hours and then wait till midnight to recapture. But I'm not gonna just sit around for a day and a half because you think that me having 8 hours left on my 70 is not enough to do something that day. I will say at GP Transco, the safety department micromanaged driver logs. I never liked that. I still don't. It was a little much. They are very tech savvy. Everybody got a tablet to keep their logs on. I actually kept mine on my phone. There was an app you could download. They like drivers to take photographs when they start in the morning or whenever they do their pre-trip. Take photos of the truck and trailer, and then photos when you stop for the day. A lot of people for some reason objected to that. I mean, the way I looked at it was twofold. One is it kind of ensures that you did a full walk around, because how many times have you seen trucks going down the road with no trailer lights on, working? Well, if somebody did a full walk around, they would have caught that, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is I always felt like it protected me, because if I pull into a truck stop and I take photos all the way around, and then in the morning my bump, my front fender's crushed, I could be like, hey, when I parked, here's what the front of the truck looked like. Now here's what it looks like. I didn't hit something. Somebody hit me while I was parked. I thought that was a good way to protect yourself. I mean, I have a dash cam that would record that now, but my point is that I didn't think that was a bad policy. GP Transco, unlike Night, unlike Prime, has inward-facing cameras. However, they do not require you to uncover them unless you have some safety incident. Or if you're willing to uncover it, they pay you 2 cents a mile extra. I uncovered mine because I was like, I don't care what they see. I mean, seriously, if I get in a wreck, it's not like them seeing me. It's not going to matter. My liability is my liability. In other words, if I plow into somebody that's, slowed down for traffic, it's not going to matter if my seatbelt was on and I was like 10 and 2 and totally focused on the road. I'm still liable I'm negligent for plowing into them. Whether or not I was on my cell phone or picking my butt, or I left it on cruise and walked in the back to make a hamburger, it doesn't matter. I'm still liable for the accident. So I'm just not that worried about a camera. Some people are freaking ape shit about it, but like I've said in other videos, if Prime wanted to put a camera in this truck to watch me, and they could do it, and they wouldn't even have to tell me about it. They could, they could punch a little tiny hole somewhere and put a camera, or they could have, I mean, that's how the workplace is. So anyway, I never thought that was an issue at GP Transco. Some people want to make it out like it's some, big brother shit. But honestly, I know for a fact I did stuff while driving that if they were actually watching me, they probably would have said something. Because I used to freaking, I'm not saying this is a great idea. Don't do this at home. I'm not recommending this to any kids. But I would reach back and get a soda out of my fridge while I was driving. Now, I will say this. I don't take my eyes off the road. And I don't take my, I have a hand on the wheel. But I still think they might have said something. They've been like, hey, if you want a soda out of your fridge, pull over and get it. So anyway, I just don't see the camera thing as an issue, but I will tell you that that's a thing at GP. So I know I covered a lot of stuff. I appreciate you hanging in for if you're still watching. Yeah, so I still have some night t-shirts because I don't throw stuff away unless it's, there's something wrong with it. Also, this is the shirt I throw on if I'm going to jump out of the truck and take a swing at somebody. Like if there's a brawl or there's a couple drivers fighting, I go up, I put my night shirt on, I go out, sucker punch somebody and run like hell, and then I come back behind the trucks, jump in my truck and put a Prime shirt on, and then put a ball cap on backwards like Paul wears it, and go out and go, what the hell happened? And they're like, some guy from night sucker punched us, and if we find that fucker, we're gonna kill him. So anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time on Tim Travels. Bye.